we are getting ready to enter into our first session, which is really asking the question around mission versus missional. Mission versus missional. Is there a difference? And to help us to have that conversation, we are excited to have two people to kick off, Dr. Jackie Bland and Reverend Carl Johnson. And so just to share a little bit with you about Jackie Bland, for some reason, we don't see anything sharing right now. So I'll put the picture of Jackie Bland up. To tell you a little bit about Jackie, she currently resides in Richmond, Virginia. She serves as the founder and the CEO of Resolute Leaders Initiative, LLC. Prior to this, she served with a faith-based organization for 32 years, doing a variety of different leadership roles nationally and globally, with her last 7 years ministering in South Africa. As a leadership coach, she earned a Doctor of Ministry degree in leadership and spiritual formation from Portland Seminary of George Fox University. She's passionate about coming alongside others as a soul care companion and a spiritual director, helping them deepen their own self-awareness and paying attention to God's activities in their lives to lead from their authentic selves. And then we'll hear from Dr. Reverend Carl Johnson. All right. And so Carl is a church planter with urban focus and a passion for helping people. He has planted grassroots local communities and focuses on worker co-op businesses that start missional communities. Carl has a track record for urban focus and a passion for grassroots community development and empowering workers through co-op businesses. He helps grow church planting networks and missional communities across the nation. Beyond the business of church planting and bridging multicultural communities and working co-op businesses to create missional communities, Carl is pioneering change-making initiatives to build impactful relationships and networks. Connect with him to learn more about his work and how you can join the movement. With that, I'll give you Dr. Jackie Bland, and then we'll hear from Carl, and then we will come in together for a conversation where I would invite you to put your questions in the chat. If you hear something from either of them that really is profound and kind of captures your ear and you want to ask the question, drop it into the chat. And after each of them share, we'll have an opportunity to discuss, and then we'll go out into small groups where we can talk about it further. All right. So let's see, Jackie.
Yeah, good morning. Can you not see me?
We can't see you yet. And if we could unshare, if we could stop all screen sharing, because right now I don't see her slides just yet. Okay. Okay. Okay, Jackie, if you want to start, we will make sure that we get your slides up and ready to go.
Okay, for some reason, I was automatically, it stopped my video, correct? And light of my slides. That's okay.
Would you like your slides to go up, or do you want to be seen?
No, I don't need to be seen.
Well, we do need to see you.
Well, you will see me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of technology, hey?
Yep. All right, you just let us know when you want us to advance the slides.
Okay, just want to say a hearty good morning to you. It's great to participate in this, I think, historical event. I'm excited to be a part. Thank you, Lori Ruffin and the team for inviting me, particularly talking, or at least sharing about the topic of mission versus missional. And I have the opportunity to at least take a stab at the difference between the two. And I'm not really going to do all that, but what I'd like to do is to attempt to discuss, to share information about what I've learned over the years and have read to a limited degree about mission. And always, whenever there's an opportunity to discuss a topic, it's good to have a working definition. And so I would invite you to consider this working definition of mission: a body of person or persons sent to perform a service. Now, there's multitude of definitions, of course, and yet this is very generalized. I purposefully kept it very general because we all come from various missional backgrounds where we probably have our own definition. But what is mission? It is the engagement of our persons, our body, our collective bodies sent by God in the context of biblical theology, sent by God to perform or engage in a service that God leads or directs us. And so it is an opportunity for us to consider from the perspective of what does it mean? What does mission mean? Next slide, please. Well, let's take a look at beginnings. There is a beginning to missions, and I thought it would be helpful to include it. It includes Abraham in Genesis 12, 1-3. God specifically called Abram and Sarai before he changed their names to Abraham and Sarah. He called Abram out of the Ur of Chaldeans to himself, to a task, not because of anything particularly true about Abram, but it was all because of God. Also, the missions continue with Jesus' disciples in Matthew 20, 18-20. We are familiar with that as the Great Commission. Jesus imparted a task, a mandate, a mission with his disciples to continue the work that he had started his previous 3.5 years in the context of evangelism and discipleship, the church. And then, of course, our invitation, Acts 1:8, in the power of the Holy Spirit, we are to continue the continuation of service called by God to do his work. Next slide, please. Black presence and mission. We have a past. African Americans or Blacks have a past regarding missions. Missions started with William Carey to India in 1792. In the late 18th century, some freed slaves traveled to the Caribbean and Africa. And in late 1700s and early and mid 1800s, we went to the world being sponsored by white mission boards since we didn't have our own. Can you believe that? I mean, it is a rich heritage of reflecting back on the shoulders of those we stand on, who not only did missions stateside, even though in this country, the systemic institution of slavery kept us bound and kept us in bondage in a sense, even though I believe we were still doing missions, but in the context of our very tumultuous environment during that time. But God raised up those to be sent abroad. And I think that's incredibly fascinating in light of what was going on in this nation during that time. But in the late 19th and 20th century, our efforts in missions waned due to exploitation and colonialism. What's interesting that even though we didn't have our own, there were a few of our own mission agencies, but on a larger scale, different ones of us tried to go with these white mission agencies, but eventually what ensued was exploitation of us as a people, especially in the various audiences we were working with in the Caribbean and in Africa. There was colonialism In order to do missions, we had to do it a certain way. We couldn't do it based on our own flavor. We couldn't do it on the flavor of the flavor of the indigenous people. And so that contributed to international foreign missions waning, but also there was still the intensity of being persecuted and being relegated, dehumanized as a people stateside in the US. Next slide, please. Also, what includes our past is our attempt to express missions at home, and the US involved outreach. Now, outreach, I believe, has a lot of different manifestations, a lot of different definitions per denomination, but we still were reaching out to others. As a Black people, that's what we do. That's who we are. We not only take care of ourselves, but we help take care of others. There is still the existence of foreign and abroad missions in the Black church, but foreign doesn't necessarily mean international. It could also mean reaching others beyond ourselves, other cultures, like the indigenous people of this nation, like Asian Americans, like Latinx people, and various other people that were in this country as well. We consider those things foreign. And also our past includes not only developing our own churches, our own Black churches because of racism, but our HBCUs were developed as in the past to provide an opportunity. Many of them started as seminaries or religious organizations or Christian organizations that would train us up to go out and do missions here at home as well as abroad. However, there was a shift, and the shift was, again, the intensity. African Americans were frequently hampered and rejected by white agencies because of color and fear, and they couldn't fund themselves to go internationally necessarily, even though there are exceptions. This is very generalized information. I know that there's exception to everything that I say. But because things were so terrifying and so fearful, and we were dying here at home, we began to focus inward on surviving in this nation. There was a level of survival that embraced missions here at home, and that resulted in the shift to survive, the shift to take care of our own financially, to feed, to clothe, to house, in a variety of different settings throughout the nation. Next slide, please. Black presence in missions. The different programs, the feeding and clothing programs that were needed to help survive people, the emergency funds, even presently, not just in the past, but presently, especially kind of post the height of COVID, when so many people have lost their jobs, when people are being evicted. Long COVID is keeping people from their jobs, and the increase of the mental health challenges that so many people are experiencing. Not to say that missions doesn't involve international, but with the idea that there's only amount of funds to go around, what do you choose to do? What is the priority? And again, it's the idea of surviving a generation of people, the next generation of people. Therefore, people need food, people need clothing, people need emergency funds. I go to pre-COVID, my church was at about 10,000 in number. And then during COVID, like many churches around the nation, there were loads of feeding schemes provided every Friday. Anybody and everybody could come by and get food. There's an emergency fund. Different ones of us contribute to the emergency funds of our church, and so any given person can apply to keep their lights on, to pay their rent, their mortgage. Mental health. We have different care ministries and grief care and other types of care and needs, not just at my church, but across the nation. This is missions. The encompassing of a body of people, individual body, a body of people engaging and serving others. Missions is what stateside we consider, these things we consider as missions, but also internationally. One is not exclusive of the other, but again, depending on what happens in this nation requires us focusing and prioritizing on meeting the needs of people. There are limitations: systemic societal racism, trauma, COVID realities. Next slide, please. Advantages. We are people of faith. We have the hospitality in our DNA. We care for others, not just ourselves. A rich heritage of soul care since exiting the continent of Africa, or being stolen from the continent. Let's keep it 100. Being stolen from the continent of Africa, and on the continent, we have cared for each other. We have cared for others. Next slide, please. Considerations. Our historical resiliency and adaptability as a people is something to be utilized as a platform. Mission involvement makes for a stronger local assembly, whether it's stateside or abroad. And finally, just want to expose you, final slide, expose you to a book co-written by an African-American brother called The African-American Experience in the World of Missions, A Call Beyond Community by Vaughn Walston, who was one of the co-writers. So that's my take on missions in a very limited capacity, in a very generalized capacity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie Bland, for walking us through. That statement, our historical resiliency and adaptability as a people, helps us to in the past to have shown up historically and to show up now in missions. And so now we are excited to hear from Carl Johnson, Reverend Carl Johnson, who will talk about missional. And then we can enter into a conversation, missions, which I think Dr. Jackie Bland, defined and gave us a lot of examples of, and then we can speak into and press into missional, and seeing what is contrasted, what is overlapping, how is it the same, how is it different? And so we'll hear from Carl.
First, before we begin, I want to thank Dr. Jackie for walking us through those definitions and what that means. Thank you so much for poising this conversation for who we are. So I come to challenge, and I come to challenge some thoughts and paradigms around missional, and just so we can have some clear presentation in our conversations later. So I don't come to argue. I came to bring an argument. So I believe like being Black and missional is one main thing, is that bringing the redemptive plan of Jesus to the world. I hope to unpack how the lordship of Jesus in all of life, not just ministry, impacts our neighborhood and city. And I believe redemption looks different in the African descendants of slaves, like Dr. Jackie said. It looks like a dry cleaner. It looks like an insurance co-op in Black churches. It looks like housing co-ops for generations through families. Redemption is, I believe, the crossroad between Jesus and man. The redemptive church brings the place where Black people felt wealth for the very first time. A Black missional leader that I heard about had a heart for change his community with a specific thrust on justice. I think of the organizing of SNCC and the movement that they have around the civil rights movement, and how Ella Baker went to churches to recruit college students through her connections through the NAACP. See, the history of the missional Black church is neighborhood. There are three things I really believe that make up a Black neighborhood, and these institutions still lie. They were churches, schools, and grocery stores. See, the focus on Black communities being the dominant community has changed. We have sent a lot of people away from our neighborhoods and they don't return. And so we now send our best and brightest to the institutions that don't send them back. So the missional landscape I like to explore today is called Apostolic Square. See, Apostolic Square is imagination and impulse, dreaming for a redemptive neighborhood, city, and world, who we all can envision seeing the redemptive world with us, not apart from us, with us in it. And so missiology is about what we do for our neighbor and where we work and live. I believe mission is about who we go to share the message of to unknown people or helping people for their missional indigeneity and hopefully enact disciple making. See, being missional is not the same as being on mission. The outcomes may someday be the same, but mission goal is to make disciples elsewhere. And Habakkuk says this, that he wants to flood the earth with his glory. That is the imagination of a missional practitioner, that he would share the gospel in a redemptive way to all people around. And I believe the apostolic imagination is practiced in four ways. I believe we preach the word. We preach a relevant and missional word that caters to the teachings of Jesus. We give a deed, we will give time, treasure, and talent to see others flourish. I believe we'll be an authentic place of relationship seeking to know Jesus. I think we'll use our work to influence change and to change injustices that affect the poor daily. The missional dream is not about theocratic rule. And Dr. Jackie talked about that. She talked about a divine rule that took over in the use of colonization and exploitation. Mission usually ties to a theocratic mindset to change government, to build a divine government, but missional creates an impulse among those around neighborhood. The apostolic impulse I would like to talk about that's married with this imagination is that you are empowered and sent to a city and a place. The impulse on how we go and doing it is on a consistent basis. The impulse that calls all of us into doing missional practice. Being missional is not about how many jobs you have in the community, but how you multiply your faith in certain areas. I would caution a teacher in the inner city as missional. I would say a group of neighbors who run an after-school program is missional. Missional is not doing redemptive works alone, but with a team of folks. Missional imagination and impulse is to solve redemptive problems. A missional focus that always points to Jesus is serving the poor, the underserved, the underestimated, and for the sake of the gospel. This presents us with a new missional mindset that your imagination and impulse not only focus on people, but the place, and also focus on the pain that the gospel can redeem. In conclusion, I think the gospel is big enough to provoke, to incite, to reveal that Black communities can build systems, that Black people have rich theology that the whole church needs, that we have a catechism that can tell the gospel, but also empower Black folks in rich historical narratives. If we are to be apostolic square, we can't have imagination without impulse, and we can't have impulse without imagination. So if you are thinking about this conversation, You have to have another dream that includes everyone around you. And I'll end with that.
Ooh, that was good. That was good. So now I'm going to invite you to drop any questions that you have into the chat. It's a dream that includes everyone around you. Like that's some good stuff. That's some real good stuff. Hold on, let me see. Can I pull Dr. Jackie on the screen? All right, and then let's see. Right. All right. Listen, Zoom is tripping today, y'all. It's acting up. All right, so we're gonna I want to take some questions. So if we can spotlight Carl and Jackie and myself, let's get into a little bit of a conversation and chat about it. As you all heard each other speak on mission and missional, what observations do you have as we kind of tease out the distinction, and what opportunities do you see for Black people moving forward today, you know, drawing from our history and leveraging that for the future, right now and the future of the church. Would love to kind of see what would you double click on as ideas that we really need to hold on to.
I feel like often as I travel and seen the history of the Black church, not only in America, but abroad, that the one place that a Black man and woman can be themselves and truly show up is church. Unfortunately, that is not the place any longer. And we have created strategies and dynamics that sometimes hinder how people show up at a Black church and how they hold space. And so I've seen what Missional can provide to the Black church in whole is a gathering of values and virtues that people could come in commonality with. And I saw that's what Dr. Jackie has said. Like we need to come around the same mission at least once or twice in our lifetime in the church. And if we can't, then we see the divide, we see the division. And I didn't put the quote out there, but it said Barna has said only 6% of adults have a biblical worldview. So we have to reteach these dynamics within the church, and that's the long haul work that we have to do.
Thanks, Carl. Jackie, what do you think? You know, as you have looked back into the history and, you know, reflected on these ideas, and then even heard from Carl, what do you think we need to pull out if we're going to be faithful going forward?
Yeah, thanks for that, Carl. Thanks for your presentation as well. I was sitting here thinking about the difference between missions and missional. Historically, from my perspective, again, this is just my perspective, it was more of a hidden idea of doing, engaging and doing and meeting needs, and justifiably, of course. And again, the historical context of needing to survive in order to thrive. When I think of missional, you know, especially in light of what Carl was saying, I think of being, you know, the core essence of what I do missionally comes from not just doing, but also being in Christ, being the hands, the feet, the mouth of Christ, and And that's a paradigm shift from doing to being. And I think this generation, especially taking the younger, I mentioned that I go to a 10,000 member church, and actually the honest truth that there are very few young emerging leaders. We're losing our young emerging leaders because I believe they're more into the being aspect. If they were exposed, not to say that they're not at my church, but the idea of, how is my faith in Christ relevant to the struggles, the trauma, the realities that I go through, rather than, sure, I wouldn't mind, helping with the food giveaway, and the clothing giveaway, and, and the nursery and those kinds of things. But, the relevancy of a genuine, authentic faith in Christ. And what does that look like today for, a 20-something-year-old? In the midst of this current society where people being killed left and right because of the color of their skin, right?
Yes, I think you raise a really, really good point and a really good question, and that is one of generation. I think it has to be said that we as a people have not had the luxury to decide whether or not we're going to meet practical needs. We've been meeting needs. That's not a new concept for us, because that's what we needed to do. And especially if we look at pre-integration versus post-integration, our reality changed with that point. So it's good that we're now kind of engaging and cross-culturally, that sort of thing, but that did make a shift in the Black community in terms of what things look like, in terms of how we got along. And so now that we think about young people who the younger generations tend to be very in tune and concerned about what's going on in society. They want to be active, they want to care about issues. And if there is a disconnect with our churches, if we have a piety, but we don't have proximity, then there can often be a disconnect, and they say, listen, I'll just do my community work somewhere else other than church if I can't find a home within my local fellowship. We have a couple of questions have come through that I'd love for you all to consider. This one is for you, Jackie. So how do you know of what do you know of HBCU's roles in mobilizing cross-cultural missions? I would be interested to know if you have any additional insight.
I would have to say I don't at this point. Even though I'm surrounded by several HBCUs here in Richmond, in close proximity to Howard, in Hampton. No, I'm not sure. In my past experiences working with a faith-based organization and seeking to partner, with several chaplains, at Hampton and Howard, it just seemed to still be relegated to home. Missions being relegated to home and not necessarily international or abroad. Not to say that the students at these HBCUs weren't going abroad, because they were, exchange students and different things. And of course, if they're, if their faith is at a maturing level where they see themselves that everywhere they go, they're a missionary, anywhere and everywhere, whether it's in the White House or on the continent of Africa, in different cities, or Seoul, Korea, or Thailand, not exclusive to Africa, then they will actually, engage in missions, even as an exchange student. But in talking with the chaplains, unfortunately, they were just trying to minimize territorialism, between the pastors and the chaplain who had the young people, and the pastors who wanted the young people, and the chaplain who were losing their key leadership students to churches because they got the corner office and the big the 5-digit income, as a 20-year-old. So my HBU, that question, I can only address it in a very limited way and not very currently unfortunately. So my apologies.
I appreciate those reflections. If anyone is on the Zoom and does have some books to read, some resources, articles, please drop them in the chat. Again, this is intended to be a multi-directional conversation around what's going on. But I do think that you hit on the idea of scarcity and how, as leaders, if we are concerned about brain drain or ministry drain, how might that affect the way that we invest in the next generation of Black leaders if we're concerned about losing them from our ministry? And I think there's an opportunity.
Can I chime in a little bit, Lori? I do want to talk about HBCUs and some cross-cultural missions. So there is a sordid history with Liberia, correct? With the Reformed Africans of America who moved there and created another system. And so I do know there was since the 80s to the 2000s, there was a lot of mission work through fraternities and sororities to go to Monrovia and Liberia to do a lot of service organization there as people had experienced. I believe it was a direct result of people understanding the plight of African Americans moving and create a dichotomy in Africa. And so I believe there's lots of history and story around missionaries going to Liberia very early on after that. And so I would I would just believe that's one of the examples that I see coming from HBCUs is the dedication to try and redeem Liberia from some of the past hurts and pain. And so even the corrupt president, his last name was Johnson. I'm hoping he's not related to me. So, who was one of the most corrupt leaders in Liberia. So that created that civil war. It's not my cousin. No.
No, I'm just kidding.
And so just wanted to put that out there. Like there is that. Just from my experience, that conversation is there. Yeah.
So Carl, well, I'll finish this comment and then I have a question for you. I think we need to tap into the idea that God has enough. And even Deneen put the comment in the chat. We need to embrace the idea of multiplication by subtraction. Releasing our best leaders can have a multiplying effect in the kingdom. And it's almost like sowing seeds, right? Like we hope, as parents that we will have children that will go beyond where we have gone. And adopting that kind of mindset could be a game changer. So Carl, question for you. What are some obstacles that keep us as a community from cultivating apostolic imagination and impulse? And would love for you to name internal and external obstacles.
So the most that we have seen in apostolic imagination. So that means imagining yourself as a Black leader that can go into the world with a redemptive plan that can impact people. That right there is not supported. That right there is not visioned. That right there is not something that people see. Like, sorry for the white people online, just have to say this. White people have an imagination in a world without us, quite frankly. And so, quite frankly, when we look at the gospel, people do not see us in the future. And just like Dr. Jackie said, that's trauma. That's a trauma from every Black person. That's from every organization, everything we see in society. So the first thing that I believe we have to come to terms with, and we have to continue to preach, is that Black people are in the future of the church and will always be in the future of the church, and that we can move apostolically in that mindset. And the impulse is that God has empowered us. Romans 1:5 says, to whom has received grace and apostleship to share the good news of Jesus, to teach it among the nations. He did not say that only these people group have that knowledge and theology. He says we all are empowered and sent. And that's the impulse that Paul gave into Romans, to saying that, hey, you are all empowered and sent. And I think the question around subtraction and multiplication is, are we really subtracting?
Mommy,
Are,
can we
are
call
we,
Lee
are
from
we
your phone?
multiplying?
Who?
Are we
Lee.
multiplying over and over again? Right. And so if I think Una will talk more about this, because I stole something from her playbook. We have to multiply our faith. If we do like Paul did and said, hey, Timothy, I trust your aunt and your grandmother because their faith is strong, and I can take you with me, not because I think you're the greatest preacher on earth or I think you're the most charismatic leader, but because I've seen their faith. And I think that is a key to this generational problem that we have, is that we have to teach the faith among us all, not just among those who are different from us, who we want to reach, but among our children, among our family members. And we have to teach that faith, and that faith will multiply. And once again, this is longevity. Or if the Holy Spirit wants to do a movement in us, it can happen now. So that's how I answer those two questions.
Thank you. Jackie, what would you add to that? Just to kind of repeat the question, the idea is, what are some obstacles that keep us as a community from cultivating an apostolic imagination and impulse?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little earlier, and this is, again, just my experience and living in a variety of cities, being a part of predominantly Black churches across the nation. About 9 or 10 cities before going over and living in South Africa. It's that territory thing. One of the obstacles that I see is, if we hold on to ours, or if we try to hold on to ours, or if someone, if someone hears a call from God to leave that particular church body, but is basically persecuted, because they're leaving, then it's very limiting.
Yeah.
Because it can breed contention and strife, which no church wants, right? Which every church leaders try to minimize. I think that's one of the many obstacles. And I mean, there's a lot of micro ones, comparison, when if I was a part of a church that the pastor relied on income based on what people gave, and when the money was drying up, the scare tactics increase. It's so many, micro. But I think in terms of an advantage, and this is a biblical principle, we reap what we sow, but in 2 Corinthians 9, to give, blessed are those who give, we freely give. We can't outgive God, Micah. We can't outgive God. When we give freely in God's name for God's kingdom, He abundantly gives back to us. And so that is, that's I guess I would say an advantage, is that when we are willing to release, someone said it earlier, Carl, you alluded to it, and Lori, when we release, we receive. When we hoard, we become destructive. We do, our church environments do, and so again, that's my limited perspective on that. But that's not just the church body, that's, faith-based organizations, which I spent 32 years in, and in so many, and even seeing it over in South Africa, because living in South Africa in the Black Township, that's a whole nother experience.